Hi, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Tarot for Our Times. My name is Sarah, and I'm your medium on the go. And now, as I promised myself today, ahead of time, was that I would do only posts on what this day is really about, and that is Martin Luther King Day. So, in choosing my card for the day, I chose the Six of Cups. And I wanted to, before I forget, this is, of course, for entertainment purposes only. People talk about the Death card and the Devil, but to me, this cup, the Six of Cups, this innocent looking thing, is is the scariest card in the deck of the tarot for me. Because, and this is one of my pet peeves about Facebook and other social media, is that people get really caught up in this memory of childhood and drinking out of hoses and running around till the street lights came. And of course, I was part of that generation too, but I enjoyed it. But it wasn't, it's nice to remember those things, but to also remember the time of history that you lived in. None of that is ever any good, especially since it's Martin Luther King Day. Is that I always think of Black and brown people that grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That might not have been the idyllic, happy days thing that I see on social media. And I'm telling, for the white middle class kids, it wasn't always that good either, especially if you grew up in dysfunctional homes. So I do relate all of the cards of the year to the day because to me, Martin Luther King represents the 50s and the 60s, and how we've had TV shows and movies that really idealize those times, and we know that they were not that great. So in going along with my cards of the year, Justice in Reverse. And so when we go back to those times and remembering what Dr. King fought for, we had segregation, we had the lynchings, and the most, I won't go into different details, but I think one of the most horrific incidents of the 50s was the brutal murder of Emmett Till. For those that don't know, he was visiting relatives in Mississippi, I think. Yeah, Mississippi, from Chicago, and was a 14-year-old kid who didn't quite know all the rules of being in the South, in the deep South. And so he was in a store one day, and a white woman claimed that he had whistled at her. And that set the tongues to wagging, so he was later kidnapped and brutally killed. Now, as time went on, the people, the culprits, the woman's husband, and several other guys were brought to trial for that. And it was always like hung jury. I think it was like hung juries and acquittals on certain things. I think even the feds tried to come in and have a bite at that, but nothing seemed to work. It seemed as though all of those guys and that woman, who later admitted that she lied, seemed to get away with it. The law never touched them. But if you follow the history, every single one of them died of really horrible, incurable cancer, and were in a tremendous amount of pain. They very, very ugly deaths. Not as ugly as Emmett's, but very, very ugly deaths. And to me, that tells me that, hey, sometimes the universe steps in and deals out the karma that only the universe can. We're not allowed to, but it can. So I'm going to say, we've got the Judgment card, and to me that may represent as today we may and on we may learn that the illusion of the past is just an illusion, and people talk about the big awakening and people, in the age of Aquarius, that sort of thing. I think one thing that may be of consciousness together thing, awareness thing, is that people may all of a sudden start to realize, you know what, it's nice to remember. And there's nothing bad about remembering playing softball or stickball or whatever. But to live in the past and think it was all so wonderful is a big mistake, and that keeps us locked back in the past. So I think part of this will be is some very wise people will realize that we can't live in the past and it really wasn't what it seemed to be. And then with the general energy of the major arcana or the minor arcana of the year, it's the Five of Cups, and it's telling us that we get stuck and we idealize things so much that when we're told these truths, then we get into what was my part in it, and all kinds of blame and blaming the world and being really stuck in it, saying if you turn around and look at the now at the upright cups, you can let all of that go and move on. So getting back to this, I always have to laugh at this card a little bit because I feel it. To me, what this card sometimes tells me is that these kids are behaving well while the parents take the picture, and they'll have a wonderful memory of them, yet forgetting that the kids probably beat the crap out of each other as soon as the picture was taken. And to me, that's pretty much what this is all about. And but at any rate, I want to do a reading about what does this teach us? I mean, where are we with this? And it's kind of hard not to bring in today's today's change of whatever into this. But what I want to do is see that, with that, we can't help it with that. But instead of focusing on that, it's like, what is the big picture? Because whatever's going on, it's this too shall pass, pretty much. So we have to look and say, well, what does this teach us, and what is going to what we're about to experience, and going into the future beyond that. What does that teach us? I mean, I'm looking at the kids, little kids today outside playing and whatever. Are they going to have really fond memories of this time? I mean, it's almost like, I wonder if maybe children in fascist Europe and Nazi Germany who were not Jewish or with the resistance, I wonder if their parents were able to shield them from the horrors that were going on down the road. Although from people I know that were there, 10 years and 20 miles later, said you could still smell the death. So I don't know how they could accomplish that. So it kind of makes you wonder what happens with children when when it's right outside the door, or even worse, in the house. So this will be the one read that I do about this for Martin Luther King Day. So we have actually the King of Wands in reverse. And this is very, this is a male energy, and he can be the tyrant of the king. He's the tyrant of the king. He's unfaithful. He's all kinds of things that probably remind you of somebody right now. But I also want to say that with the wands are the fire element, and they're supposed to be inspiration. Since this is in reverse, I have to say that he's all of those things I just mentioned, but he's also like the light is dimming, the inspiration is starting to fade. It isn't there so much anymore. And also, like, maybe what somehow someone perceived him and other leaders that were kind of charismatic in the past, that eventually, as they mess things up, that eventually fades. So it's really important to that's why I think it's so important. Like when you remember the good times, remember what was going on in history, and maybe be kind of grateful that you're not there anymore. So I'm going to say that I think what this is telling me is that people, not the cult vulnerable types, and I'm going to say that people who once idolized someone, when they find out that they were not quite who they were, are going to get over it faster. I want to say, like, if you're like I always say, I'm so jaded that when I find out one of my idols has clay feet, I don't take it that hard. And I think that's with the Snoop Dogg and all those other jerks. You know, I think that it comes along with that. Is like you take a look and say, these people we idolized in the past, like they're only human, they're greedy and whatever. But if you realize that to begin with, is that when they, when they falter and really disappoint, it's time, you just have to say, oops, my bad. I'm going to take down the posts of them and I'll trash them for a while on social media. I'll get it out of my system. And then it's time to move on because greed and whatever. So that's an important thing about, especially I guess it's got to be terrible for those people who had them as their childhood idols and now they're grown up. I mean, so that's one part of letting go of the past. And I think this comes down to leaders and celebrities and all that. I mean, to find out your childhood cowboy idol of the 50s might have been a wife cheater and awful person and that sort of thing. I mean, that's pretty rough. And the problem with this is that dwelling on all of this stuff and people not being who we thought they were supposed to be, it really does zap your strength. It really does. And I get a sense that living in that past like that and getting that kind of disappointment, um, it sets you up big time. So you've got to kind of take everybody with a little grain of salt. You can admire people, but and this comes around this whole movie star and reality TV culture and all this sort of thing. So, let's see what underlying all of this stuff that we do is, I'm going to say that when life is not that great and we come into self victimhood and beating ourselves up and refusing to see the truth, and yeah, we want to go to a movie star, a rock star, a president, whatever, to think that all of that sort of thing is going to fix us. But yet here we are. We stay stuck. And the thing that always struck me about this card was that she's not tied up that tightly. That blindfold is really loose. And the thing is that and she's made her prison are those swords. So it's kind of like it's time to get real. So here we go. With our hero, the Knight of Wands, who's galloping. And I always thought that even upright, there's a little bit of a negative energy about him because he's kind of galloping along, setting the world on fire, not realizing there may be people standing in the path of that horse and that fires burn out. But he's young and maybe he has to learn that lesson. And then the truth hits us. Then when the truth hits us about our fallen heroes, that kind of thing in the past. I mean, it could be like, I remember when I found out that Bing Crosby was not the nicest person and, that he cheated on his wife while she was dying of cancer, this and that, and he was abusive to his sons. I think I was at a place like, oh, well, these people just aren't who we see them in the movies, and it's just a mad time to say, I like his singing and that sort of thing, but I don't think he's certainly not a hero and a great person. So okay, so we're gonna go back to here we go. The seven of swords. A lot of this stuff is like what movies and things do to us. I'm going to say that the past reflecting the present is that we kind of have maybe in our, I think even in Western Europe culture too, we have this thing about we do love our anti heroes. We do love the bad boys. And the thing is that, maybe looking at our past, and some of us have dated some of these and think, oh, that was kind of fun while it lasted, and thinking, but, you kind of forget about how awful they treat you. And they kind of like, try to steal your soul and everything. So, we've got that. And, that's something we need to get over and say we can like them in the movies, but then when we carry that out of the movies, that's where the problem begins. So our culture kind of teaches us that. That's why when Luigi offed that CEO, why were people surprised and shocked and clutching their pearls? Because we grew up with this. And it's funny because he kind of looks like Robin Hood. We had this Robin Hood thing originally played by the real bad boy of Errol Flynn. You know, how many of you have dated one of those? So we've got this thing about this whole, then I will say that I'm probably guilty of, I certainly wouldn't egg someone on to do this. And I know it's not the answer, but once it's done, it's like, that person was probably asking, well, he probably was asking for it, but I mean, I'm telling you that there's the shadow part of us that, that we have a tendency to make inappropriate heroes. And then we've got the Eight of Wands in reverse. To me, what this tells me in the past is that, we live in the past with it, and I'm going to say a lot of this is around fantasy and illusion. I'm getting to think like maybe this is why we are where we are today. That when we get into all of this stuff about how wonderful the good old days and all that sort of thing was, that it really does stunt our growth and things can stop happening. I think one of the great message of Martin Luther King was that he and his contemporaries, they kind of took the lid off of not only that idyllic 1950s thing with with the cleavers and all of that, but also the myth of like that no, where he's from in Georgia, back in Georgia, Mississippi, and those they were not Walt Disney's Song of the South. If any of you seen, we all saw that cartoon when we were growing up with Uncle Remus and all the stereotypes and all that sort of thing. So it kind of does poison the mind and it sort of stunts the growth. So kind of coming into the present with that is that I guess the one thing, and I guess I think I'm going to, this was my Biden card, but I think for today, this is my Martin Luther King card. So with a great deal of the compassion that he had and his spirituality, he pointed out to us that no, things are pretty horrible. But the thing is that we can change, we can work on changing them. But if we live in this fantasy world, we can't change things. And I'm sure the people back then, and especially, well, in the North, they were kind of guilty of it too. But let's say in those segregated states that people were probably saying, when civil rights came in and, Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act and all this sort of thing, is that people in the South were saying, and I remember they were saying, boy, I remember the good old days when people knew their place and they were presenting this idyllic scene from the beginning of Gone with the Wind where the Scarlett O'Hara and the slaves, and they were so peaceful on the plantation until that nasty old war happened. But he opened our eyes to the truth. Like, no, that's not how it really was. And I do remember my fourth grade teacher. I don't know. All of a sudden, she got into the. I don't. We were listening to some Stephen Foster songs, and all of a sudden, she told a story about. I'll never forget this, about how she was visiting down south, and she wasn't used to all that segregated stuff. Being a northern Jewish woman from Pittsburgh, that she said she was just walking on the sidewalk, and a black man was going to pass her, and he stepped off the sidewalk to make sure her pathway. She said she was in such a state of shock that when she found her first private moment, she broke down and cried. I mean, this is, but he was the one, and people coming back from the South telling us these stories. This is what opened our eyes when we were little kids, and I do kind of feel sorry for our parents who had to kind of soften up the Emmett Till story, is to not traumatize us, but at the same time tell us what was going on in that world. So, that's kind of what he was starting to do to bring the present of the 50s and the 60s. So the conscious thought of America was, um, it's that I see this in reverse. I'm going to say it's a false sense of victory. It's that phony patriotism, like we're really the winners and we're the best. When you look at the history of that time, and I'm putting it in the context of Martin Luther King, but it's like, oh, we're the best and we can do no wrong and this and that. And, but that was a lie, but that's what people needed to think. But underneath, subconsciously, the Ace of Wands in reverse is saying, that's very, very uninspired and very, very toxic. But we have to consciously put on the act like we're the big winners when actually the opposite is true. But I will say that the Europe in the 50s and the UK, they were no angels either, because I've seen old pictures of the shops in the UK with signs saying help wanted, colored but no coloreds. Okay, so we were not the only guilty ones. So let's see the so here we have the Nine of Cups. I'm going to say that when, as time has moved on, that that we've really been put out of our comfort zone, and this is very tough emotionally. And I do remember back then it was very hard for all of us to pretty much take, whether we were kids or our parents, that really learning about what was going on. I do believe that I think it was 1955 Emmett Till incident, 14-year-old kid. That's kind of what started to wake people up, and then seeing the people on the back of the bus, and then there's Rosa Parks, and um the Woolworths, that was going into the 60s by then. So let's see what is this going to do for us in the future? Well, we have to grapple with all of this, that and maybe this period of time is saying we really have to not use these troubled times coming up as an excuse to go and escape into the past. No, we need to go into the past to see what was wrong with it, and to make sure that we didn't repeat it. Okay. What I think that a lesson learned from this that could be coming up in the future is that, eventually people cannot sustain this. There's too much that comes up. And I believe this happened in the 60s with the civil rights and desegregation. I think there's a trying to turn this, it goes again to let's turn the clock backwards and live in the good old days. Then we realized the good old days weren't that good, and repeating that history is that those that want to do that, it's unsustainable, yet they never learn. They never ever learn. You would think that on the heels of the Holocaust and the awful things that happened, that people would have learned and say, we've got to learn to live together. And that, nope, nope, still they, I mean, lynchings were still going on, that whole thing. But that whole thing falls apart. Even though they take people's rights away, it's totally unsustainable. So I want to look at the conclusion and draw, which I think I'll use one of these. The conclusion. Okay, there's that one. I'm going to say, going back to it's almost like the anti Six of Cups. In this, in the context of this reading, this is like going back. This reminds me of the little boy who, in the story of the Emperor, the King's New Clothes of Hans Christian Andersen, who everybody says, oh, what a beautiful suit of clothes, when he didn't really have anything but his skivvies on. And the one little boy blurts out the truth. He's not wearing a thing. And then everybody feels foolish. I'm going to say that I really believe that there is like the young voice of innocence that's going to, I believe, and it could be embodied in an adult who just never got out of that part of childhood, which is really good. It's going to say, look, you got to wake up, folks. This is make it. There's no making America great again, when in this respect it wasn't so great to begin with. So I think there will be the signaling of it's time to wake up. It's time to wake up from all this fantasy. And as I will say that Hollywood has been a big culprit with this. So I'm going to take an oracle card and see what kind of an oracle conclusion we can put on this Martin Luther King Day. And looking, oh boy, you cannot wake this. This goes along with the justice. We have awakening. Awakening. Awakening is that now, living in the present time, we have a choice that we can make these the best times of our life. It may be very challenging, but this is what I'm saying. I think astrologically, we are we are coming here, and maybe this is kind of like maybe this whole thing may be the big wake up call for all of this. So this is really interesting, because this woman in this beautiful Victorian oracle card is kind of seeing it as a very personal journey that she's been on. It's like, aha, I have my aha moment. But I think what we have coming up is the collective of people realizing that, and they're coming out of their graves. They're coming out of the graves of being fed a lot of BS, and by politicians and Hollywood and all this sort of thing. And it's like time to get out of the graves of the past and really look for today. Because today is, I mean, it sounds like an AA thing, which it is. There is wisdom, and that is it. In today, that's all we've really got right now. We've got, that's all we really got is today. And so I'm saying, learn from the past, have some good memories, but be realistic about it. And I think that in a lot of ways, this is the big Martin Luther King message. He would say, make America great again? Are you kidding me? And I really feel as though, I always feel his spirit very strongly around this time of year. And that's kind of like, we've got to fix things now. We can't worry about what's going to happen next month, because we don't really know. Some of us try to speculate about what's going to happen, but that we're not real fortune tellers. We just kind of read the energy of maybe strong chances. So I'd say the message that Dr. King leaves is, in my world, that past that you love so much, and I saw all those same shows on TV and the movies, I knew that they were a lie. And so some people need to learn that stuff was not true in its entirety. And to me, that's his big message. So I will leave that with you, and I am hoping to come back soon with maybe more meanings of the day. But to me, this is his day. This is Martin Luther King's day and nobody else's. So I will leave that with you and have a nice evening. Bye.